In this lesson, we're going to look at how to find the required sample size to meet a set margin of error for a given confidence level in a confidence interval for proportion. To do this, in StatCrunch, we're going to open up Stat, Proportion Stats, One Sample, and it is the bottom one. It's the one that says width and sample size. So again, make sure you're in proportion stats, one sample. So in this width and proportion, or width and sample size package, we need to tell it three things to get the sample size. We need to, number one, tell it the confidence level. This particular problem requests 99% confident. Number two, under target proportion, it says in this problem that she uses a previous estimate of 0.58. The target proportion is the previous estimate if one is given. So we're going to make that 0.58. And then the last thing we need to do is give it the width. And this part requires a little bit of calculation, not too much. The width is how wide do we want the confidence interval to be. It's not what do we want the margin of error to be. Remember, the margin of error, 0.02 or 2%, is the value that we're going to subtract from our point estimate and add, which means that the width of the interval, the distance between the lower bound and upper bound, is twice this amount. So if I multiply that by 2, I get 0.04. So again, the width is 2 times the margin of error that's given in the problem. And then I press compute, and so there is my sample size. So my sample size is 4,041. The second part of this problem says that she's not going to use a previous estimate. And if we don't have a previous estimate, probably a more realistic approach to this is to not assume what we're going to get for a sample proportion, because we haven't taken our sample yet when we're doing this. And so if I don't know what my proportion is going to be, the safest thing we can do is assume that the sample proportion is 0.5 or 1/2. 1/2, if that's the proportion we were to end up with, requires the largest sample size. So if we use that, it's going to work with any proportion that we end up with. We also need to change our width back to the 0.04 and then compute. And so we can see, using 0.5, we got a little bigger answer. It is 4,147.